Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and today we have an extra special treat, I would say, because yesterday I did a debate with the atheist Darren Lute from Skeptics and Seekers on the issue of the scientific method and does theism or atheism ground that better? And obviously, Marvin was supposed to be there as the moderator for that debate because that discussion was his idea there. And Marvin, he slept in and he said he had better things to do. So that's what no, there was a mix up on the times and stuff like that. But yeah, Marvin just obviously that's why we're here today. And Marvin requested just do a kind of short debate review and give his thoughts what happened. But yeah, Marvin, how are things on your end? What have you been up to since the last time you were on the show?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm working as a secondary school teacher here in Hong Kong. I'm still studying. I've got an apologetics master's from Biola, but I'm still studying at Biola, doing their philosophy degree because it's just so interesting. I really find philosophy fascinating. I got into philosophy through theology, and I've done some other stuff like linguistics, got an art degree, got English qualification. So, sort of the humanities as a whole is an area that I find very interesting and seems to be where I've landed. So, kind of reading, teaching, and enjoying life.
Awesome. Well, all right, cool. Well, without further ado, obviously, Marvin, you did have a chance to watch the entire debate from yesterday. So just to kind of kickstart us off, I'm kind of curious as to your general thoughts about the debate as a whole. Yeah, like what was kind of your general thoughts about the debate there?
Yeah, a difficult one. I think it was interesting. I think that you sort of were prepared to argue the proposition that was put forward that uh, Christian theism grounds the scientific method better than does atheism. But I think your interlocutor didn't really try to ground or talk about how the scientific could be grounded in anything but some very blunt terms. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's
yeah,
just how it went. You know, one person turns up with a scalpel and another is turning up with a hammer.
yeah. That was something that surprised me because given the topic of the debate, obviously the question was set up as what is the the best explanation for the grounding of the scientific method, and the idea was that was agreed to was okay. Each side is going to make a claim. I'm going to be claiming theism as the best grounds. On his end, he would say atheism is the best grounds, but he kind of threw me for a loop in his opening where he was just like, no, actually, I'm not going to claim that. I can't prove that atheism is the best grounding. So I was kind of just, okay, well, there's nothing, he's kind of just conceded that thing. So it's all on me to, I guess, just prove that theism is a good groundings or the best groundings. So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, atheists sort of generally, the ones we come across always love to play the burden of truth game. It's not so interesting because nothing really gets said. Um, how do you see the burden of truth given such a proposition as was debated yesterday?
Yeah, so like obviously in terms of the debate yesterday, the intention was that both sides would have that burden of proof and would be making their own claim type thing,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, that was what we I thought we were intending to do. But yeah, like I said, Darren kind of surprisingly kind of gave the game away right from the beginning and saying, nope, on the atheist side, we can't meet that burden of proof. And I think at one point he even said in his opening that like atheism just has nothing to do with the scientific method at all. It's not a worldview or anything like that. So yeah, that basically put it on me to, okay, well, what is science? What is philosophy? And how does that relate to the theistic worldview in terms of grounding? And that's where I went for this strategy of, okay, let's look at the presuppositions that science has before it can even get off the ground. That for scientists, they're just philosophical assumptions. And I tried to argue, my argument was that these assumptions better fit a theistic worldview and don't fit an atheistic one.
Yeah, I didn't get the feeling that he kind of understood that. I think it started off. You asked. He kind of gave a general introduction, didn't he, about his background, and you asked him a good question, which was, well, why do you spend most of your time on theistic sites debating the existence or challenging the existence of a theistic God? He said doesn't want to talk about, what is it, the world's on a unicorn's horn or something like that.
Oh, how the unicorn's horn spirals, like
so
like religious debates.
That was a sort of contradictory from his presence on these sites, but he did save it by saying that he lives in America, and America is predominantly Christian, and that's why he chooses to debate this issue. So we'll remember that he did say America is predominantly Christian, because when we speak to these people, most of the time they say it's not Christian. Now it is Christian. Okay. So anyway, we're getting back to what you just spoke about, the burden of proof. He gave up the proposition, gave up trying to debate the proposition by saying that atheism is just an answer to one specific question about the existence of God. It's not a worldview. Yeah, I think it's part of a worldview. Obviously, it's part of a worldview, and it has implications in that worldview. Exactly. If there is no God, then there can be no transcendent reason for our existence, no transcendent reason for history, no transcendent purpose for us in this life. So it does have a ripple effect that does affect worldview. So perhaps in that sense, I do disagree with him, though I would have perhaps been more inclined to say a materialist worldview than an atheist worldview. Is there a reason why you chose to say atheism as opposed to materialist or physicalist?
I guess it was just kind of, okay, theism, and the counter to that would be atheism, right? So like when you, I think you said it rightly, when you suppose atheism, even defining it the way the atheist wants, right? Just, okay, well, I lack belief in theism, or there is no God, I guess is what I had in mind. And you can deny, oh, well, that's a worldview. It just answers one question, but it doesn't. There are logical implications or entailments that follow once you suppose there is no God. And part of that, I think, speaks to science and the scientific method, and specifically the presuppositions, philosophical presuppositions that have to just be assumed true, as to use Darren's words, as brute facts. And I don't think that's a rational way to go, to just, oh, well, they're brute facts. Like, you don't have knowledge. You can't believe this. Like, that's kind of a defeat once you go the brute facts route. No, you have to have a knowledge about these foundations. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work.
So there's no justification. Would you say there's no justification for the facts? They just become brute facts?
So I would use the word warrant, but yes, like
Mhm.
that. So for example, we on the theist side, we do have foundational beliefs that aren't derived based on other beliefs and stuff like that. I would call these properly basic beliefs, proper with
Mhm.
respect to what? Warrant, that the criterion that when added to true belief gives us knowledge. If you think knowledge is justified true belief, fine, then yeah, it's giving proper with respect to justification. But when you say that you just, oh well, my foundation is just their brute facts because I just want to accept it, that's not knowledge, that's not justified, that's not warranted, and we can basically just throw your brute facts in the garbage.
Mhm. But I think for your interlocutor, he saw brute facts as somehow being proved.
Okay, well, being his chair, obviously Darren's not here to defend himself, and I did talk to him after the show about this, and I think he admits, as shocking as it is, he just comes out and says, "No, like they are just random brute facts, and I don't have knowledge at all." But he's like, "Who cares? So what? In the end, it works. When I assume this and then I do science, it leads to the results that I need, and I can get to the moon." Type thing. So yeah, that's what he would say.
Yeah, and to that I would say, well, the theists can get to the moon through using science.
Yeah.
They're not. They're not. There's not a dichotomy at play. It's not theism versus scientific method. It's what is best grounds scientific method.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just
That's a different question. I think if he keeps he kept repeating this mantra. That's why they don't go to philosophers
to go to the moon or
to
something.
learn about reality. Well, I mean, who said you do? I've never heard of I've never heard of I've never heard a theist say, I'm not feeling well, I'm not going to see a doctor, I'm going to see a philosopher.
Well,
You
okay. Well,
go
I
to Yeah.
yeah, to the recognized expert and stuff like that. I do
Yeah, so
think
my point is you go to a recognized expert in the recognized field. There is no dichotomy between science and Christianity or science and theism. But that's a different question to what best grounds the scientific method. If you think the scientific method is something different, I think that's quite a different conversation to have. I mean, I suppose what Darren would say is that the scientific method is boils down to empiricism, only that which can be measured through the senses and measured being part of what he would consider to be part of the scientific method. But then again, that's a philosophical assumption about what science is. So I just disagreed with uh, you know his understanding of science.
yeah, so that's one thing that stands out to me is one of his points that came up later, and it got a little bit heated at this point because as respectfully as I can say, Darren is just wrong, but it's this notion of like what makes the principle of falsification. Let's say it that way, right? So
Okay.
you use a hypothetical statement. If hypothesis X, Y, or Z is true, then it predicts that we would see this consequent Z, Y, or D, and we don't see that. Therefore, my hypothesis is false. And Darren insists, and I've looked for anyone who would agree with him because in philosophy and logic, I know for a fact he's just wrong. But even atheist scientists like Brian Greene or Steve, none of them would agree with his understanding of how falsification works, right? So that the truth value of a conditional statement, right? If P then Q,
Yeah.
right? That when we're talking about explanations, in this case, P is a sufficient explanation for Q because that antecedent is sufficient to explain why the effect or the consequent Q has come up. And that's all that you need to demonstrate for the truth value of a conditional statement, is that logical entailment is in fact the case, that P is sufficient, the antecedent is sufficient, or a sufficient set of conditions to bring about the consequent or the effect. That's how you measure, and that's what scientists do with any hypothesis, right? If Charles Darwin's evolutionary hypothesis is true, then we predict we would see variations in finch beaks or something. Oh, we go out and we look, and guess what? There are variations in the finch's beak and stuff like that. But Darren has this weird notion that, well, in order for a conditional statement to be true, you first have to prove the factual possibility of the antecedent. And I assume he was kind of waffling back and forth, but using Albert Einstein, it was almost like, well, you have to prove it's factually possible. How? Through mathematics. And that's just not true at all. But yeah, first place, before I get into my side of that, what are your thoughts on Darren's kind of, well, in order for the principle of falsification to work, you first have to prove that your hypothesis is factually possible before it can be falsified or tested or anything.
So you have to prove P before you can make the conditional statement that it leads to Q.
Pretty much, yeah. Or at the very least, prove that it is factually possible.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult one to apply. Let me have a think about this for a second. Yeah, I'm not getting it.
Yeah,
sorry.
It's just totally illogical, right? Like I said, in basic logic, and again, every scientist I've seen will all agree that all that's needed for the falsification test to take place is that you prove that there's that logical entailment, that whatever the relativity theory is sufficient to entail that we would observe the consequent, namely gravitational lensing. Nobody needs to prove, oh, but is it possible that relativity theory is factually possible that relativity theory is true first? Einstein didn't do that. Nobody did do that. And in fact, here's I have a kind of a quick little video with the traditional from Karl Popper and the black swans and stuff like that. So so let me bring that up. So Karl Popper is famous for bringing in this notion. I disagree with him, but he believes in falsificationism as the only way to do science. So here's a quick 2-minute clip.
You might think that scientists begin with hypotheses such as all swans are white and then go about looking for evidence to support them. Karl Popper disagreed. He suggested that scientists do indeed begin with hypotheses, bold hypotheses that can be falsified by evidence. But rather than looking for supporting evidence, Popper argued scientists go out of their way to refute their own hypotheses, testing them to destruction. They go out searching for black swans, not more white swans. Science is all about falsification, not confirmation. It's a series of conjectures and refutations. A former Marxist himself, Popper wasn't fond of Marxism. Marxists argued that theirs was a scientific analysis of history. Everything that happened was determined by class struggle, and a workers' revolution was inevitable. However, when the workers failed to revolt, rather than taking this as a refutation of their view, Marxists suggested workers were simply victims of false consciousness, unable to see the situation as it truly was. Popper fulminated against this way of dealing with counter-evidence, claiming it immunized Marx's hypotheses, which were originally testable, turning them into irrefutable pseudoscience. There was no imaginable observation that could prove the Marxists were wrong. If the workers revolted, that showed the Marxists were right. If they didn't revolt, that also showed they were right. It was win-win.
That's kind of the classic example that's always given in terms of the white swans and the black swans, right? But so in terms of, okay, if my hypothesis is true, my hypothesis is that all swans are white, then the consequence is there will be no black swans that can be observed.
Mhm.
Then, okay, you can, based on that basis, that is sufficient to entail the consequent, right? If all swans are white, that's sufficient to explain and entail the consequent that no swans would be black. So then
Okay.
you go out and you try to, if you see a black swan, that falsifies your hypothesis. No, what Darren would say is, well, no, that doesn't count, because first, before you go looking for black swans, you have to prove that black swans are even factually possible, perhaps using some kind of mathematical equation or something like that. No, that is not required logically or scientifically at all. And no scientist in history of mankind, when doing falsification for their hypotheses, says that that's a requirement. You don't have to prove the antecedent is true or possible or anything like that. You don't even have to prove that it's possible all swans are white and stuff like that. So that requirement just it's totally false, right? So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I see what is being said now. I agree with you. It seems just seems to me that if you have to prove what you're setting out to try to prove, then you wouldn't have anything to prove.
Exactly. Yeah, he's demanding proof for the hypothesis before we're even testing it and stuff, right?
Mhm.
And testing it in the sense of trying to falsify it. Now, it is true that, okay, after you make your hypothesis and it makes these predictions, a separate thing you could do is, okay, let's go out and try to find evidence to either disconfirm it or confirm it. And Albert Einstein, in that case, yeah, he did, after he came up with his hypothesis, he engaged in mathematical equations to try and prove, okay, is this even factually possible from a mathematical or physics standpoint? But
Okay.
that wasn't a requirement for his hypothesis to be falsifiable. That's just an independent indicator of truth. It's something he's trying to do that, okay, great, this works with the mathematics. Never mind that Einstein fudged with the mathematics and made up BS with his cosmological constant to support his religious belief that the universe was static and
That's
stuff,
it.
right? But yeah, never mind that. Darren just conveniently ignored that. But that the point is, that's a totally independent thing, right? That's where he's trying to go out and confirm his hypothesis and show, well, it's not mathematically contradictory, therefore it is mathematically possible. Great. What other ways can we prove if it's true or false? And that's where we get into the empirical predictions, right? Like the lensing and all that stuff. So yeah, they're just totally separate. I just wanted to make that clear. And everywhere I look, everyone with a PhD, scientist, logician, philosopher, everyone agrees that the truth value of a conditional is not dependent on you proving that the antecedent is true in advance and or that it's factually possible using mathematics.
In proving that the consequent is true. Say that again, please.
Yeah. So basically, Darren is trying to say that in order for a hypothesis to be falsifiable, right? The hypothesis has to be proven true and or to be factually possible first before it could be falsified.
Okay.
And that's not a condition for truth. All that matters is, well, does the hypothesis, if true, sufficiently entail that the consequent would come about?
Can you give an example?
an
for your
example of,
listeners?
sure. So, okay. So, yeah, using relativity theory, right? I use this example in the show. If relativity theory hypothesis is correct, then we would observe gravitational lensing. Great. No need. Albert Einstein doesn't need to prove that relativity theory is true or factually possible in order for it to be falsifiable, because we could go out right away and look in the appropriate place. And if we don't see gravitational lensing, we know that relativity theory is false. There's no need for me to do the work of proving that it's actually true or even factually possible.
Okay, good example.
Okay, do you not agree, or you look a little skeptical?
No, totally agree. It's just seems obvious to me. I totally agree.
Yeah, but it's not to him, and that's like he's just denying basic logic. So that was kind of my most frustrating part of the debate that stood out to me that I wanted to get across. Okay, here's another kind of spin-off of that, and I'm curious on your take. So at one point, I just realized in order to make any progress with Darren, I had to, okay, I'm just going to play his game, even though it's irrelevant. I'm going to play his game.
Yeah.
And okay, let's prove that something is factually possible. In this case, we were talking about God. Is God factually possible, right? Not. I was saying, well, look, we can prove that none of the facts of the universe contradict the notion of there being a spiritual substance that has knowledge, power, and benevolence to the maximal compossible degree. There is no factual fact about our universe that contradicts that being's existence or that obtaining. And he's
Okay.
so like if Darren's putting it to you, but you haven't, and he would come back and say, but that doesn't prove that God is factually possible. So if he put that
But
to you,
that's not the claim bit. But that's not the claim. Carry on. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just curious, how would you go about proving that God is such a being is factually possible if Darren put that to you?
Well, I think I'd do what you did. You said, well, why isn't such a being factually possible? And if he can't give you a reason why such a being is factually possible, then he hasn't really answered the question. What he did say was, you haven't proved that such a being is possible.
But the way that you do that is by look, you scan all of the facts, all of the facts, and none of them contradict. We can apprehend that none of the facts, the law of gravity, the second law of thermodynamics, nothing about the laws of nature or the natural world contradicts such a being. I mean, think of relativity theory, right? So that was an example. What was Albert Einstein doing when he did the math afterwards? Well, he was demonstrating that none of the facts of mathematics contradict his theory. In a way, it was a falsification test, right? And that proves that, at least mathematically speaking, relativity theory was possible. So by demonstrating there's no contradiction, that entailed that it's possible.
Contradiction is a proof in maths and logic, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. So the fact that we know there's a lack of any contradiction, and obviously Darren himself couldn't point to any factual contradiction, that is what proves that it is possible. That's just what it means to be possible. It means
I think there's a kind of method employed here by the skeptic, which is always prove to me, prove to my satisfaction. It's pretty difficult to prove to a skeptic in the debate to their satisfaction, right? Because that's a person relative thing that you're trying to do, or one is trying to do. So my point is, well, I can't prove it to you, but I can say that given the facts, it's more probable than not. And plenty of scientists more qualified than both yourself and I do accept it, what we're saying as fact, that's good enough for me. I'm not going to try and, prove to your shifting goalposts. It's just not something I want to do. My idea is not to debate whether I can prove it to you. My idea is to debate whether, given the evidence, the proposition is more likely to be true than not, which I think is a little bit different.
Okay. I'm not sure this is relevant, but this skeptic in the audience is asking this question over and over again. So I'll just raise it once. But Russell Shute is saying, I don't need to apologize for indoctrination of children with cult nonsense. What makes you think your faith is respectable outside of your den of wolves dressed as sheep?
Okay, I don't need to apologize for indoctrination of children.
I guess kind of related to, I guess he's kind of wanting to contrast science and faith and saying like science is respectable, faith is not. Faith, or perhaps he means philosophy, it's only accepted by people who already believe something or whatever. So it's not a good method for gaining knowledge of truth.
Yeah, I keep looking at the question, but I can't make heads or tails of it. I mean, what is cult nonsense? Materialism. The idea that you can, I don't know, give puberty blockers. I mean, what is cult nonsense? I mean, my kids grew up in a Christian home, but I didn't force them to have their beliefs.
Gotcha.
So it's just a very complex question. By that I mean one that presupposes the truth of quite a lot.
Okay, let me just ask, interpreting it into a kind of a smart question though, like do you think that philosophy and theology, to incorporate faith into it, are these disciplines that actually lead to truths and are gaining knowledge, or is it strictly no? If it's not proven scientifically, then we have to dismiss it.
I mean there are many ways to know, right? Science is not the only way to know, and to suggest that science is the only way to know is a fundamental error in what was being argued yesterday. And here's one example that I'd give. It's wrong to experiment with dangerous drugs on African kids because they don't have the wherewithal or the knowledge to challenge what drugs they've been injected with. Okay, so we can't do mass experiments on third world country kids, right? That's an ethical decision, and that's not a scientific decision. So the ethical there leads the scientific. So what we know about what is right and wrong actually determines how we do science. And I think that is something that the interlocutor did not take into account yesterday, that science is not magisterial in that it reigns supreme in all areas of life. It has a place and is extremely good at doing a certain kind of thing. It cannot do everything.
Yeah.
Or cannot inform of everything.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's in my opening statement, I argued for the external philosophy of science position over the internal view that Darren goes for and stuff like that. So it sounds like you on that front you fully agree with the external philosophy of science position, which awesome. Was there anything on that front that I missed about that you know of, or you anything that you thought was interesting on that specific argument that I raised? Or
no, that was good. I think another thing that the interlocutor didn't quite grasp was that philosophy is great for bringing conceptual clarity, to questions. Okay, sometimes questions need focusing, and it may not be science that is able to focus those questions. It may be the philosophy of science that enables us to focus those questions and make sure we're talking about the same thing, or one thing, or kind of boil the question down to its essence. So I think philosophy is a tool of science that is employed by scientists, whether they believe it or understand it or not. If they don't think they employ it as a tool, they're just naive philosophers, and that's quite okay. Or I say quite okay, it's just quite common.
Gotcha.
For example, what is, things such as what constitutes a scientific experiment is a philosophical consideration. What constitutes evidence is a philosophical consideration. How should we interpret the evidence is another philosophical consideration. How should we report, as you quite clearly pointed out, is another philosophical considerations. So there are all these kind of areas of the scientific method, or any scientific method, that are gone over and cogitated upon, but they're not strictly arrived at through science. They're arrived at through thinking about what is the right way to do science, and thinking about the right way to do science is, as far as I can understand, a philosophical cogitation, not a scientific one.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those higher or second order questions about
as you
science.
put it. Yeah, science is the first order discipline, and obviously philosophy is the second order discipline. And that's notwithstanding that within science you've got sort of philosophers of physics and philosophers of chemistry who sort of are scientists themselves, but are specialized, often with PhDs in those areas, and are able to sort of very clearly and conceptually look at areas.
Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, just go to your local university. For the skeptics in the audience, and I think we have at least a couple. Just go to your university. I dare you to find for me a department of the science of philosophy. It doesn't exist, but find the philosophy of science. Oh, you bet they have departments there. It shows that proves the external view, right? Okay, so I do want to get your take on some of the seven points that I raised. Just before I do, though, I think he's a skeptic. I'm not sure what. So Isaiah chapter 11 verse 8 is not incompatible with the scientific method, and I looked up what he's talking about, and it's just saying that the nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. The baby will play safely near the hole of a cobra. Yes, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. So I think this is a skeptic trying to mock the Bible, and he's saying, well, look at the Bible following the scientific method, telling kids to stick their hands in snake pits and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's a theist, then perhaps he's saying miracles are possible. But if he's a skeptic, he's saying, as you said, this is preposterous. But that verse in Isaiah is a prophecy talking about the future, what will happen. There will come a time when the dangers of this world no longer exist. It's talking about a redeemed world.
Awesome. All right, cool.
So he's taking it out. So he's taking it out of context to make his point. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well said. So, okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and just bring up the slide where I made my main argument based on those philosophical presuppositions. All right, so yeah, I want to turn it to you because obviously you weren't on the show yesterday, but like, were there any of the responses Darren gave based on these seven scientific presuppositions that are really philosophically proven or debated. What did you make on some of our discussion on these sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, he did say that mathematics is made up, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not sure it is made up. I mean, many scientists think that they are real, and some is made up. You know, it is a language, and others do say that it's to some extent real.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's why I like the baby.
what it describes is real phenomenon, not made up phenomenon.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you would take kind of a realist, and that Darren admitted, like, that's why I played the baby things. Like, look, math is discovered. It's something that's real, and we just inherently apprehend it. And even babies, that it's not something that we're have to be taught. They inherently recognize basic mathematical concepts and numbers and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
So it's not totally made up. You know, perhaps some esoteric branches are made up, but I definitely do think that it does describe reality. And I think the big question is, for me, is why do we have this language that is able to describe reality with astonishing precision? I think for that, the interlocutor will just say, well, it just does. Well, it just does, but well, it just does is not a satisfying explanation. If it does, because it was designed in such a way by a rational mind for rational beings that are able to interpret the world in a rational way, given its constitution, seems to be an eminently more plausible explanation for the applicability of mathematics than just saying, well, it's made up and it just is, which isn't really an explanation at all.
Yeah. I mean, even Albert Einstein and the most godless atheists in the world, they realized this argument from the rational intelligibility and mathematical describability of the universe. Everywhere we are. Now, one thing Darren said in terms of the universability of the laws of logic and mathematical numbers and stuff, and I think at one point he tried to argue of course, because it all condensed down. It was all through the Big Bang Theory. It was all, expanding from one point, really small universe kind of thing. So obviously he thinks it's eternal, but so of course it's uniform all throughout as it expanded from a really small thing where it was totally uniform. That's why now as we expand, it's always all places in the universe are intelligible and follow the same laws of logic.
Yeah. But the question is, why is it uniform, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I've read recently that I think the chances of entropy, the initial condition of gravity being the way it is the same as throwing a 6 on a dice 70 times in a row, which would take something like a trillion years, which in other words means it can't be done. That's the staggering implausibility of the initial condition for gravity being set as it is, which is the question that is being asked. Why is it such?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I think you're right. And even with Darren, they can never answer that why question. It's just, well, it's just the way it is. And
yeah, I mean, I think he does have an answer, but the answer is not a satisfying one. And I think that the theist does have a satisfying answer and is able to give a deeper level of explanation. I mean, if the interlocutor in this instance is not so bothered about a deeper level of explanation, I think that's okay, but not satisfying.
Well, we're able to provide a contrastive explanatory hypothesis, right? So, like, obviously the universe didn't have to be universally logical or universally describable by math and stuff like that, right? There are many other options. Maybe there are mixtures where parts are and parts aren't, or it's just totally not at all, or something like that. So, like, under atheism, they can't provide a contrastive explanation for that. They just have to say, well, we just take the universe the way it is. We can't contrastively explain why it's this and not that way. We can through the design hypothesis because we have a logical God
Right.
who's omniscient and grounds all the mathematical numbers and propositions, and he designed the universe to be consistent with his nature. So we can provide that. That's why it's not chaotic. It's logical and ordered. The atheist, I don't think, can provide that contrastive explanation. And that's why theism is a better explanation.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Another thing that I think is an important point, and you and I have gone over it with atheists, so I'm interested in your take, but number 3 and number 5. So basically, not just the existence, but the fact that we can know that there is an external world out there and that we can come to know facts about it. Isn't this do you think that this simple fact that we as human beings can gain knowledge about the universe, the external universe, is that proof of theism, or can atheism explain that?
I think we can know facts about the external world and be pretty sure that the facts that we know about the external world are facts. The atheist can know facts about the external world, but it's difficult for them to understand, to really posit that they are facts. They just can know about the external world, but not to the same degree of certainty that I think that the theist can. I think Alvin Plantinga has given a good argument for that, his evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Exactly, yeah. That's what I'm getting at.
I mean, Darren said, well, the interlocutor, I should say, said, well, atheists can know facts about the external world because if the facts are wrong, then the creature doesn't survive. But that misses the point of what Alvin Plantinga was saying, is that, well, the facts could be wrong, and as long as the facts didn't inhibit survivability, then those facts would be selected for, and you would end up with wrong beliefs. Exactly. So I think that the atheist here just has to accept that they know. Basically, I just think theism is a stronger footing here for sure.
Yeah. Cause it's important to note what you're saying about atheists as individuals having knowledge. I fully agree, because on the worldview of theism, it makes sense that certain atheists are designed have God-designed faculties to gain knowledge about the external world. And I think that in certain ways they can and do have knowledge about truths about the external world.
Right.
Although in one sense, I do take the tag argument or the presuppositionalist argument that once you're probed, like what I was doing with Darren, and saying on atheism, let's assume atheism is as a worldview, I don't think you can ever have knowledge because of arguments like how would you ever know that your cognitive, your faculties that produce your beliefs are designed or aimed at producing true beliefs about the external world? There's just nothing. You don't have a designer who made your faculties designed to be truth conducive. No, it could be, as evolution predicts, they're designed to producing beliefs that are beneficial for survivability. That's not necessarily truth. So yeah, once you realize that, and Darren did, I asked him about this, and that's why brute facts, we just have to believe it, kind of thing. But once you realize you just are relying on a brute fact as your foundation, you can't have knowledge. You don't have knowledge. You have to be warranted or justified all the way down for all of your beliefs. So basically, on atheism, the thing just implodes and collapses. And once the atheist realizes that their foundation, they don't have knowledge about the foundations of everything they believe, then it all falls like a house of cards, and they have no knowledge. It's impossible for them to have it. But thankfully, we're on it. Theism is actually true, and that's why some atheists do have some knowledge claims based on their faculties functioning properly. Like atheists know the sky is blue or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense as to the
concept? Yeah, it makes sense. I think, obviously atheists do know a lot of things.
As long as they're ignorant about the nature of the lack of knowledge about their epistemic foundations for those beliefs, then they can have knowledge. Once they realize, hear about Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, or, those kinds of presuppositional type arguments, then I think, and if they understand it, then they would have to lose their knowledge if they're being consistent and upholding atheism. So yeah.
And what do you think of just saying, well, it's a brute fact? Do you think that explains anything? No. What do you think of brute facts? I think there's always I've heard it said that there's an element of mystery in every worldview.
Okay, so let me clarify this, right? So I think that brute facts can be explanation. They can provide sufficient explanations, right? So that's what I was saying about the hypotheticals and counterfactual hypotheticals, right? If this theory is true, then that would sufficiently entail that the consequent is true. So yes, brute facts can be sufficient explanations, but the question is, are we epistemically justified or warranted in believing what we're believing and stuff? And on that front, the answer is no. We're not justified in the foundation. Therefore, we're not justified in believing in whatever is entailed by that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, understood. So Darren really gave it up, as you mentioned in the first few moments. He basically said, I can't prove my worldview is correct. But I just don't believe that you can prove to me there's a God, which is what I was saying from the get-go, is that he was asking you to answer quite a different question.
Yeah.
Which is quite it's not a difficult thing to do for the skeptic. It's just to ask you to prove to my satisfaction that what you say is true, to my satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I was trying to evade or be resistant and try to keep us on topic, but at some point I realized, okay, it's just not going to work that way. So I'm going to have to go down these red herrings and let's play.
That's where I let you down, really, because if I was there, I would have been able to sort of try to keep it within certain parameters, right? But because I messed the times up, sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah,
it sort of didn't focus as much on what it was sold as what it should have. Theism versus atheism. Theism, scientific foundations.
Exactly. What is the grounding?
But, yeah, I think what I did notice, what strikes me is I don't really think there's real disagreement on what the empirical or what the scientific method is given empiricism. But empiricism is not the whole scientific method. And I think the interlocutor might not like the characterization, but I think he was expanding an extremely narrow view of scientism.
Mhm. Yeah,
The
I,
view
I
that
yeah,
science alone can answer every question.
essentially, yeah. I mean, I think as being as charitable as I can, I know for a fact Darren has said that, yeah, you can gain knowledge in other things, in other disciplines and stuff like that. But
Right.
there's this notion if anything contradicts what we've learned in science, that's really the be all end all and stuff like that. So like he would ignore historical evidence for a miracle that's just ruled out right away. Or
Okay.
if there's if you gain
Mind.
knowledge,
Yeah.
sorry,
Mind. That there could be an immaterial component of man.
yeah, it was so that's where again, so we started off, that was a little bit where some frustration came on, but I had to again, I had to follow his red herrings. I was trying to be resistant, but like we started off by the way that spirit came up was okay. I'm just trying to prove that it's possible for a spirit, for a spiritual substance to exist, a non-physical substance to exist, right? So I was okay. I'm going to answer that question. Then it became, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you can prove that it's possible because there's no contradictions and stuff. And but what is a spiritual substance? And I'm like, well, that's irrelevant. But he insisted on that. So I'm like, well, here's the what that I can tell you. I can't tell you what it's made out of. It's a spiritual substance. Can you, on the other hand, tell me what a physical substance is? And if you press the atheist, they break down and implode. They can't be pressed too far. And I didn't even. I just went down to empty space and said, "What is that?" And he's just like, "Well, this is silly. I can't answer that." And if I asked him about, well, you say that physical substances are made up of subatomic particles standing in certain relations. Okay, so I guess subatomic particles aren't physical then because they're not made up of the same subatomic part. Subatomic particles aren't made up of subatomic particles standing in certain relations. So I guess they're not physical. Boom, you've just proved that it's possible and non-physical, right? So like when you press the atheist the way they're pressing you on this irrelevant question, because obviously we do know that physical substances exist, and we can know that spiritual substances are possible too. But getting into the nitty gritty of like what is it, like what's the material made of, what can you measure it, and then it became, yeah, can you measure it, applying a false standard. It's like me saying, okay, well, can you measure a subatomic particle with a ruler? And when he says no, I'm like, oh, okay, great, then it doesn't exist. I just dismiss it because I've set up this arbitrary standard of unless you can measure it with a ruler, it doesn't exist. It's not. It's just you're talking about fairies. So it kind of went down that rabbit trail, but I just at that point I just gave up and like, okay, I'll go down. I'll go down it and answer it, and hopefully he'll realize that it's totally irrelevant here. It doesn't speak to the main
Well,
question.
I think you gave a good answer. He asked what is a substance, and you told him what a substance was. You said, did you say a property bearer,
Yeah,
substance, and something else?
yeah.
You gave,
So it's an individual. It contains an individual essence, and then it which bears properties,
yeah, it's a
certain
property
essential.
bearer, right? Which is good enough. I mean, if you're just saying, well, what's it made of? I mean, I don't know what it's made of, but I know what it does,
Yeah,
right?
it's
In the
made of
same
spirit.
in the same way, and I think you were trying. Is this what you're trying to say? We don't actually know what physical stuff is made of, but we know
Yeah,
what it does.
that was
At
exactly the point that I was trying
base,
to
we
make.
don't know, but we can observe what it does.
Yeah, exactly. We know that physical substances are possible, and in fact, we know they do exist. Even though he can't answer, nobody can answer these fundamental questions about, well, but what is energy made of? What are physical substances made of and stuff? And once you get down to the most basic level, then he won't be able to answer that any more than I can about a spiritual substance. So it's totally irrelevant.
Mhm.
To the question of whether something's factually possible and or whether something actually exists or not. It has no my our inability to answer those what what type composition questions are irrelevant. And that was exactly what I was doing. You caught on, you got it. That's why I was asking about the physical substances there. So yeah. And I think he got it for what it's worth. I think Darren got it, and that's why he was trying to resist it. Like, oh well, this. Let's not go down this way, because he realized it would be parallel. And that's one thing I notice with atheists who go for scientism and all this stuff, that the double standards and inconsistency, that they have unequal weights and measures. They demand something of the theist. They love putting the theist on the defensive and asking these types of questions which they know in advance no one can answer, just because there's a gap in human knowledge at the moment on that front. But then when you turn it around and say, okay, but what about you? Let's ask those same questions to you. They instantly implode, or they try to avoid it. And that's something I see time and time again with internet atheists, and even expert atheists who are scientists like Richard Dawkins or Stephen Hawking. They would just crumble to dust if we ever applied and put them on the back foot and applied the same questions they're asking us and applied it to them and their beliefs. They fall apart.
Good points. Good points.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, okay. Well, here's my last question for you, kind of thing. Number 7. This is something I know you love, especially talking about the moral values, but not even beyond moral values. In terms of science, there are epistemic values, right? There are even aesthetic values. One of the criteria for being a good scientific theory is this nebulous criteria of elegance. Oh, the equations were elegant. They're beautiful. Therefore, it's true. So all 3 of these values, aesthetic, epistemic, and moral values, are relevant to the scientific method and doing proper science. So I don't think the atheists can even account for that at all. Did you think Darren did a good job of explaining that, or on atheism?
Explaining what?
The existence of normative values as used in science. Right? So for example,
no, he couldn't give an answer to that one, because basically he just says, because that's the way our brains are wired.
Yeah.
But what on earth does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's just he's basically he's reducing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I mean, so ethics is broken down into the way that our brains are wired. So basically, that's type identity theory, isn't it? Brain state is the same as.
Yes. Yeah.
It's reductive identity theory as well, in that mental properties are not separate from brain states, and brain states, we are brain states.
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. How can we be brain states? A brain state is a physical configuration of atoms.
Exactly. Yeah.
But a feeling of shame is not a physical or organization of atoms. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's just not a non sequitur for me.
Exactly. Yep. I totally agree. And that, again, it wasn't a debate on substance dualism and that sort of thing proper. So I didn't press it too far, but I've done entire shows where I make arguments like, look, we can prove the properties of normative values are just different than are the properties of our brain states. Therefore, they cannot be identical. We've proven absolutely that they're not identical. They can stand in causal relations. Sure, we can debate about that, correlation versus causation, but by definition, they are not identical. And one of the things I pointed out, just something that I thought I could get Darren to admit, is that at least on a pure qualia level, there are differences. And I thought he would at least agree with that, but he was kind of a little bit iffy on even agreeing to that. So Yeah, I just
I
wanted to say.
I missed that. What did you say on the qualia level?
Yeah, so I was just saying, look, like just based on a qualia level, that the normative values, the what ought, how that feels, the ought, we can feel it, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
qualitatively different, just as a sensation to any brain state and stuff like that. Like I can't, if I look at the brain state, I can't see any sensations in there or qualia and stuff like that,
yeah.
right? You have to, it has to be reported to you through testimony of the experiencer itself. And brain states by definition have the property of being observable by third parties.
Right, the third party, right? Whereas qualia are only first person.
Exactly that. So that was the thing I attempted with Darren. It didn't work in the end. I think he still kind of denied that there was a difference there. But it's essentially, it was Richard Swinburne's argument. He uses color, right? Like you can't open up someone's brain and see pinkness. You can only be
Mhm.
reported to you. Color is a spiritual property. It's not something that's physical. There is nothing that's colored out in the universe, right? It's
Mhm.
just light waves at certain wavelengths or whatever it is that you would physically describe color, but there's nothing pink out there. It's only an
Right.
observer or an experiencer that sees pinkness, and it's the same with these values, is what I was trying to argue. But yeah, sounds like
Yeah, but in one way I might put it is it boils down to the subjectivity of mental content, mental thought and content. If the interlocutor wants to deny the subjectivity of mental thought and content, then they're having a conversation, but they're not having a conversation about mental thought and content. Because the very thing that I want to ask is why mental thought and content has this subjectivity. If you can't talk about it, you're not talking about the mind. And that's why I think people like Daniel Dennett went to lengths to talk about quieting qualia. And what was the other one? He denies, what did he deny? He denies intentionality. Well, the intentional stance, another one. I think he doesn't deny intentionality. He says that we don't have intentionality, ofness, or aboutness as a property, but really we are kind of approximating machines. And when viewed from a third person, it looks like we do something intentional, but in fact, that's just as we observe that organism
just
operating within its environment. So he goes for a sort of a form of functionalism.
yeah, and just
It
for the
doesn't make any
audience.
sense. It doesn't make any
So that,
sense that we're like, yeah.
go ahead. Yeah, that just for the audience, when Marvin's talking about intentionability, this is another property that our internal mental states have that brain states don't have. And he's not talking about intention with like TION. I think it's SION. So it's something different. And
Yeah.
it's basically just saying that, look, mental states like our thoughts have this property of being about something, right? I have a thought about the chair or
Yeah.
of my desk or something. So that's different than, I just wanted to clarify that for the audience, because you're using a philosophical term that they
Yeah.
might be hearing. Oh, intentions. Yeah, I intend to go to the store today or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, as
So
you quite rightly say, intentionality is the property of ofness or aboutness.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's okay. If I can get back to the screen, son of a gun. Come on now.
Well, I thought it was good. It was quite technical from your side. It got technical quite quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. Absolutely. Yeah. Following following Darren's red herring trails and
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Mhm.
But again, if you're dialoguing with an atheist, you've got to. I mean, look, if you just realize you're just butting heads, I figured, okay, well, the conversation can't progress. I've tried to explain to him that, like, okay, he's
Mhm.
wrong, and like asking this question is irrelevant. But at the end of the day, if he's not going to get it, I'm like, okay, I just kind of gave in and said, fine, let's talk about this for a little bit, and stuff. But yeah, what can you do?
It's great that he was on your show. It's great that he does have the bottle to go into the lion's den, as it were.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I like that about him. That's a good quality. He is prepared to put his money where his mouth is. I think that's amicable, and I think he thinks highly of you, which is why he's prepared to appear on the show, which is good.
Yeah.
So
no,
for all our differences, there is a good word to be said.
Of course, yeah, and I will say this because yesterday's show there was at times there was a moment where both he and I, obviously we're to be have fun, we're arch nemesis, like I refute Darren Lute and all this stuff, and he causes me to pull out my hair, and he said vice versa. Sometimes I cause him to pull out his hair, and stuff like that. So sometimes we get heated, but at the end of the day, after the show, we had a great talk. We both kind of apologized for losing our cool at one point in the show, but yeah, we had a great talk. But it's just no, I don't think much progress, at least between me and him, can be given on certain issues, and we both agree on that. That he's set in his ways, he's entrenched, he believes what he believes, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I don't think there was any progress either way. But then again, like I said to a friend of mine, hey, the observer is the audience, not the debaters.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, I hope it was. I hope it was good for some observers, and they learned something and stuff like that. But awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's it. Anything else? Last words?
No, it's good. Good.
Awesome.
Good to catch up.
Yeah, it was great having you on again and talking to you. So yeah, let's just so the audience. So again, next Saturday actually on Friday, I'm going to be going on Faith Unaltered podcast to do a presentation on an argument from for Christianity from biblical prophecies, and it's going to be twofold. So I have my messianic prophecies, the circumstantial argument that I've made on the Reason and Theology podcast. But I'm also going to add something new based on oracles to the nations. And this is going to be using John Bloom's argument from the Twin Cities, compare and contrast criterion for biblical prophecies, which I think deserves to be explored and considered at the very least. Even if I'm not totally persuaded that it works, I think that it deserves to be considered. So
John Bloom, where is John Bloom from?
He's again a philosopher. I forget where he's from, but he wrote a paper on it for the Evangelical Philosophical Society.
Is it John Bloom from Biola?
Yeah, you're right, from Biola.
He's great. My old physics professor from Biola.
There you go. Yeah, he made this argument, this Twin Cities argument from biblical prophecy, but it looks like the paper has been taken down. But I still think it deserves to be considered and stuff. So I'll be doing that.
I think he's got a PhD in physics and one in archaeology as well, or theology. He's definitely got a couple of doctorates, so he's a real boffin. Yeah.
Awesome. And then someone Marvin will know on Saturday next week, I'm having Dr. Paul Copan on the show to discuss Is God a Moral Monster? So
I've got his book here. Yeah, I've got a copy of that.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well,
that generated
that generated a lot of controversy with the atheists.
It did when he launched that, didn't he? It really got people talking.
Absolutely. Awesome. So thank you so much, Marvin, for joining. And
Thank you.
I will click the big red button.